So let's talk about something that I find quite fascinating. There's no right way of painting hair. Hey everyone, you're watching Squidmar Miniatures, I'm Emil. I gotta be honest with you here, this is a topic that I've been interested in making for a long time, but it's such a tough topic to kind of dig through, because where do I start? Some of you might ask yourself, well, painting hair, don't you just make the brightest point on top, because that's how you do, right? You take the subject and the part that's closest to the light source is the brightest. Well, that kind of does work sometimes, but hair is translucent. So that doesn't really show how to paint life if you want to show it how it is in real life. Because if you do the old Games Workshop way, you paint a layer, you do a wash, and then you do a dry brush, you're going to get something that looks more like spaghetti strands than real hair. So no, why make it that simple? Today I'm going to try to break it down for you to show you that it doesn't have to be super difficult to paint hair, and you can still make it look good without spending hours and hours on it and still have it be somewhat realistic. So let's start with example number 1, and there's more of them coming because there's plenty of different ways sculptors sculpt hair. Let's start with this simple Space Marine hair. We could compare this to a normal shortcut men's or woman's hair. When the light comes from above and you'll be watching this person from above, you would see the light bouncing back up. So the light would be in the center of the hair. But if you're looking at this person from the front, the top part of the head that we saw previously bright and highlighted would be from this angle dark, and on the sides and the front of the hair you would have this reflection of light bouncing out towards you as a viewer. Especially the front part is where the most light would be reflected. But again, this can differ from person to person and hair type to hair type. But to make things easy, we're going to generalize it, and for this specific one we would probably paint somewhat of a donut of a highlight. So we have it dark in the center and then brighter on the edges. And especially on the curves here on the side of the head, this is where we would have the highlights on the curves. But not all type of miniatures have their hair sculpted in this exact way. Let's bring in example number 2. This is the bearded Yell, which is a 3D printable figure you can find on Thingiverse. And much like when I paint NMM, I make these inner folds, and the most outer bulges of waves would be the ones that would be reflecting the most light. I found this example on Google and I think it shows quite well what I mean. So we have this wave shape here. We have the light coming from above, and in the most inner part, as you can see, you have light reflecting and bouncing out, and on the most outer parts of these different waves, we have light bouncing out. Again, this is not 200% scientific, because it really depends on where the light would be coming from, the exact angle the viewer has, and the way that the hair is shaped and the color of the hair. But since we want to do a generalized realistic rendering from a human's perspective, this is the most usual way that we see this type of hair, so this is the way that I would do it. As a base I use Rhinox hide, and then going to Mornfang brown, and then going up to Deathclaw brown, and maybe mixing in a little bit of white on some of the more highlighted areas. And I think this really gives me a nice hair. So let's jump on the third hair type that we're gonna paint today. This is if the hair is flatter and longer, like this beauty. How would I go about highlighting the hair then? Well, let's work from the example that we had on the Space Marine. The top of the head would be dark. And then on the sides, especially on these areas that are bent on the head, that is where I would place the first highlights. Sometimes these type of hairs also have these waves when they come down to shoulders, or maybe at the bottom they're bent down a little bit, I would add a second highlight on these areas as well, just to tie things together so you don't have just like a dark piece and then one bright highlight around the edge here of the head. And you can also play around a little bit with the brightness of the highlight, so maybe go slightly darker on the bottom one than on the top one. I really think that this creates a nice shape of the head, and it's simple, and instead of working on every single strand of hair, we've worked on the general shape of the hair. And when painting these general shapes, it really makes it look more realistic than these, as I call them, spaghettis of hair. And as our last example, I would like to show you another figure. This is a very common way that sculptors sculpt hair for male characters, especially in fantasy settings. This is Emil On as well from my Kickstarter. He's got long hair, but it's centered to the top of his head, and he's got it in a ponytail. We can do the same thing, work on the general shapes instead of the single hairs. So I decided to do two highlights, one in the front and one in the back, going across the whole shape of the hair, creating a reflection, very much like if the hair was releasing the light towards the viewer in the front. And I think that's really the smartest way to go about it if you want to make it look realistic. And just to prove my point, I want to show you an example here. Say hi to my editor Victor. Thanks to all of the people on Patreon and all of you who backed me on Kickstarter, I'm now able to have him 3 days a week helping me editing videos. But take a look at his hair and how the highlight moves depending on where I move the camera around. The light is always coming from the same angle, it's from above, from a big soft box, but when I move the camera upwards you can see how the highlight moves. And when I watch him from kind of the front, a little bit from the side, that's when I have the same highlight as I have on Emil On, the figure that we painted. But again, there's no correct way of painting hair. I've seen so many examples of fantastic painters highlighting hair as though it was a flat reflective surface like a normal piece of cloth or something, and it looks amazing. I can show you some scrolling by here from painters that I really adore, and they made it look really good. And there's no one that's gonna tell you that you're painting it the wrong way, because it's art and it looks amazing. But I hope these few tips at least can help guide you when painting. And my biggest recommendation is use Google. Look at real hair. Just Google hair or wavy hair or flat hair or short hair if that's what you're going to paint, and you're going to see lots of examples of how hair can look in miniatures. So with that, I hope you had a little bit of fun and maybe learned something. If you did any one of those, please consider smashing the like button, because that helps the video get spread to new people and that helps the channel in the long run. And if you want to support this channel, there's a couple of ways you can do that. There are late pledges up for these figures that I've painted on from my Kickstarter. You can also follow any of the Amazon links in my video description or on my website squidmar.com if there's any of the tools that I use in my videos every week that you want to have. Amazon kicks a little bit of money back to the channel. If you have a few dollars to spare, please consider pledging a few dollars on Patreon. That really helps this channel out, helps me run it every week, make new videos. And a massive thanks to my top Patreon supporters. Without you guys, I would not be able to make these videos. With that said, have a great day. Bye bye. Fantastic painters highlighting hair.